Hey, what's up guys? This video is part 3 for section 8.5, which is using distributed property. I already did 2 videos on how to factor polynomials, but for this video I'm going to show you guys how to solve by factoring a quadratic equation. So if you guys haven't seen my other 2 videos, you can do that and then come back to this video. But let's go ahead and know how to factor and how to solve a quadratic equation. So one of the things we can use in order to solve a quadratic equation is use the zero product property. Now here's the catch. In order to use this property, we must have factors equal to 0 of a polynomial. So that's why I give you guys the definition of the zero product property on the screen, and I give you guys an example of a quadratic equation. So first, let's go ahead and read what is the definition of the zero product property. You guys can use this property to solve a quadratic equation. If you're not sure what it is, that's why I have one down here. A quadratic equation is when you guys have an equal sign, first of all, and the polynomial is a quadratic polynomial, which means the degree is 2. You might have a trinomial, you might have a binomial, but the degree is 2. That's a quadratic equation. Every time you guys solve a quadratic equation, you are going to look for the values of x. Now you guys see that I have 2 different x's here, and that's what happens when you solve a quadratic equation. You guys will have 2 answers. Now let me tell you guys why we are going to have 2 answers. So that's where we go to the definition of the zero product property. If you guys have 2 numbers or 2 expressions, let's say a and b, and you multiply those 2 expressions, a times b, and we know the answer is 0, so a times b equals 0. What that means, guys, is that one of those 2 expressions or one of those numbers have to be 0, because in order to get an answer of 0, when you multiply, you have to multiply by 0. Anything times 0 is going to equal 0. So the problem is that we don't know which one of these 2 is going to be the 0 value. So that's why we make 2 different equations. We can say a equal to 0 or b equal to 0. Now if you apply this to a quadratic equation, look at the 2 parentheses here. Now this one, you don't see the squared when you guys look at the parentheses, but if you guys distribute, if you guys multiply the 2 binomials, if you multiply x times x, that's going to be your x squared. So that's where the square comes in, quadratic equation. So if you guys have those 2 expressions, x plus 5 times x plus 2, and we know it equals to 0, what we can do is we can take this expression, x plus 5 and equal to 0, or take this one, x plus 2 and equal to 0. Same thing as up here. You guys take a equal to 0 or b equal to 0, because that's a zero product property. One of those 2 have to equal to 0. After you guys have those 2 equations, you guys can solve. So you guys can subtract 5 from both sides and we get x equals negative 5. You guys can subtract 2 here from both sides and we get x equals 2. So that's where the 2 answers come from. You guys have a quadratic equation. You guys need to solve by using the zero product property. Now here's the thing though. You notice up here we have parentheses. This quadratic equation doesn't have parentheses. And guess what, guys? The answers are the same answers for these 2 quadratic equations because it's the same one. But these here are factors. So this is already factor and you can apply the zero product property. This one is not factor. So we have to factor the polynomial before we use the zero product property. Now you might be asking, why do I have a linear equation on the left side? Well, this is just to compare and for you guys to understand what you guys are learning in this algebra class. So in the previous videos, and you can say at the beginning of the school year, you guys learned about linear equations. You guys have an equation similar to this, 2x plus 10 equals 14. You guys did the opposite to get x by itself, so you can subtract 10 from both sides, and then you guys can divide by 2, and your answer will be x equals 2. Now notice how many answers we have. X equals 2 is one answer. And if you remember, the word linear means the degree is 1 in that polynomial. So every polynomial has a degree. So linear means 1. Quadratic means degree of 2, so the highest exponent is 2. Cubic means 3. Quartic means 4. Quintic means 5. And you guys have many, many more degrees. So what I'm trying to say is the degree tells you how many answers you guys will have in that equation. So if you guys have a linear, degree is 1. Notice the x has an invisible 1 exponent degree. You guys will have 1 answer. If you have a quadratic equation, you guys will have 2 answers. If you guys have a cubic, degree of 3, you have 3 answers. Quartic, degree of 4, you have 4 answers, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. So that's helpful because once you see the degree, you have an idea how many answers you're looking for. Now this one here, sometimes those 2 answers can be the same number. So you might have x equals -5 here, and you guys can have x equals -5 over here. That can happen. Doesn't happen that often, but you can have 2 answers with the same number, the same value. So just keep that in mind. It's okay to have that. But we want to find, when we have a quadratic equation, 2 different answers. So what do we need to do? We need to factor the polynomial first if we don't have factors, and then we have to solve equal to 0 each factor and then solve for the value. One thing that you must have though in order for this to work, for the zero product property, everything, the polynomial has to equal to 0. You must have a 0 on one side. That's why it's called the zero product property. It has to equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, then we have to make that equal to 0. Or if you can't make it a 0, that means you cannot use the property. We're going to have to use something else. But for this lesson, for this video, we can use zero product property. So let's look at some examples here. And notice that the examples, I already have the parentheses. So it's already set up for you guys to use a zero product property. We don't have to worry about factoring. We just have to know how to use the property. So let's look at the first equation. And it says solve. So that means we need to solve for x. The parentheses are already set up. This is already factored. You might be wondering if this is a quadratic equation. Yes, it is, because if you multiply x times 2x, that's going to be 2x squared. So that's your square, that's your quadratic, degree of 2. But don't multiply, you want to use the zero product property. So first, I am going to use the first parentheses. And notice that we do have an equal to 0, so that's very important. We are ready to use the property, the zero product property. I'm going to take the first parentheses right here, x plus 4, and I'm going to equal that to 0. Or I'm going to take the second parentheses, 2x minus 8. So we have 2x minus 8, and we're going to equal that to 0. Now you guys solve for each equation. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. We have the purple equation. Subtract 4, that's the opposite. And remember, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do it to the other side. So this cancels. So x equals -4. All right, we got one answer. On the other one, we are going to add 8 to both sides. So you solve like a regular linear equation, the one you guys learned at the beginning of the year. So that cancels. 2x equals 8. And then you guys divide by 2 right here. So this turns into 1. X equals +4. Now these answers are different because one is -4, the other one is positive. So we got 2 answers. Now, the way you guys set up the answer and the way I want you guys to write your answer is using brackets. So when you guys find the x values, we are going to write the answer using brackets. You always start with the lowest number. So x, -4 is the lowest one, comma, and 4 is the biggest number. And then you close the brackets. One thing you have to understand, this right here is not a point. Do not use parentheses. If you guys put parentheses instead of brackets, that means that's a coordinate point, which means you have an x value and a y value, x coordinate and a y coordinate. This is not a point. That's why we use brackets, because both numbers are x. X equals -4 and x equals +4. So make sure you guys use brackets, and it's always nice to have the lowest number first and then the highest one. Does the order matter? Not really. You guys can have those numbers switch, but mathematically it looks nice when you have the numbers in order from lowest to highest. So let's try the next one here. The next one, same thing. You guys have a parentheses and you have a factor outside, a negative 2x outside of the parentheses. You are multiplying the two expressions and we know it equals to 0. So what we can do is we can set the two factors equal to 0 and solve. So this one outside of the parentheses, first of all, I'm going to put that negative 2x equal to 0, or I'm going to take the one inside of the parentheses, 2x minus 5, and equal that to 0. So now you guys are going to solve. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to divide by negative 2 right here. This turns into 1. I don't need that 1. Positive 1. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is positive. So we just have an x. And 0 divided by negative 2 is 0. So that's an answer. 0 is x. So we have one answer. The second answer, or you guys are going to add 5 to both sides. This cancels. 2x equals 5. We are going to divide by 2. That turns into 1. So x equals 5 over 2. All right, we got the two answers. So how do we set up our answer? We put 0, the lowest number first, and then we have 5 over 2. And that is my set of answers. So we have two answers. One is 0 and one is 5 over 2. So the next one, same idea. You guys already know how to set up the two parentheses. So I'm going to do the first one. 7x plus 3 equal to 0. And this is just extra practice for you guys to see. The second one is going to be 2x minus 6 equal to 0. So we have one option or the second option, the purple or the red one. I'm going to solve each one. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides right here. So 7x equals negative 3. I'm going to divide by 7. This turns into 1. So x equals negative 3 over 7. And you always want to check if you can reduce the fraction. And you guys can't. So that's one answer. Don't give me mixed numbers. If you can turn into a mixed number, that's okay. Leave it as an improper fraction. And the next one, or you guys are going to add 6 over here. So that's gone. 2x equals 6. You guys are going to divide by 2. So that turns into 1. X equals and 3. So we have our two answers. You set up your solution set. So we have a bracket. Negative 3 over 7. That's the first one. And positive 3 is the second one. So we have two answers. All right. Keep in mind that sometimes you might get the same answer twice. That can happen. But right now we haven't gotten any to be the same answer 2 times. All right. So the next step. Now I'm going to give you guys a polynomial that is not factor. And you guys will need to factor. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. And then you guys use the zero product property. So let's look at the next one. So notice all the polynomials here, all the equations we want to solve. They don't have parentheses. They are not factor. Now the first one, you guys have a binomial equal to 0. So that's good. Here, another binomial equal to 0. That's good. Now this one, you do not have a 0. So we're going to have to make a 0 in order to use the product property, the zero product property. So how do we solve? Remember, solving is looking for the value of the variable, x or the a or whatever variable they give you guys. So first, we need to factor. So I'm going to bring down the equal to 0 here. I'm going to use my parentheses because I need to factor out the greatest common factor, the GCF, that's factoring. And I'm looking at the two terms and I notice they have an x in common. So you can factor out an x. So when you factor out an x, the x squared becomes an x because you took 1 out, plus, and the 10x becomes just a 10 because you took out the x. Guess what? Now that you factor, we are ready to use the zero product property. So I'm going to set up my two equations. My first one is going to be x equal to 0, and that's the one outside. X, you just have an x. And guess what? We got the first answer. X equals 0. That's a number, 0. So now we just need the second answer. Or you guys are going to set up your second equation. which is x plus 10. So I'm going to write that down, x plus 10 equal to 0. And that one we have to solve. Subtract 10 from both sides, cancels, x equals negative 10. So my two answers, we got those answers. We put the negative 10 first because that is smaller than 0, and 0 is the biggest number. So my solution set is negative 10 and 0. Now, what does it mean, guys, when you guys have those two answers? If you substitute one number at a time, if you put here negative 10 squared plus 0 times negative 10, that's going to equal 0. It's going to make a true statement. And you guys can try it. Negative 10 squared, that's positive 100, plus negative 10 times negative, positive 10 times negative 10 is negative 100. 100 minus 100 is 0. So it works, right? So let's try the next one here. The next one, you guys, same thing. We want to factor. So I'm going to equal to 0. I'm going to have my my parentheses, and I'm going to factor. Let me see what I can factor. I can factor out a c. That's what they have in common, the variable c. And the 3 and the 6, they have a common factor. They do. You guys can factor out a 3. 3 goes into 3, and 6 goes in, 3 goes into 6. 3 goes into 3, and 3 goes into 6. So you guys can factor a 3c. So that means that you guys have 3 divided by 3. That's going to be 1c. You guys took out a c. So you guys, from a c squared, you took out a c. So you just have a c. I don't need that 1 next to the c. So I'm just going to erase it here. And I go to the next one. Negative 6 divided by 3. That'd be negative 2. And you guys took out the c. So we have no c inside. Now you guys are ready to solve. So I'm going to write down the two equations. 3c equal to 0. So c is not by itself. I'm going to have to solve for that one. Or we have c minus 2 equal to 0. So let's do the first one. I'm going to divide by 3 over here. That turns into 1. C equals 0. 0 divided by 3 is 0. Or you guys will add 2 to both sides over here. Cancels. C equals 2. 0 plus 2 is 2. So my solution set, you guys will have a 0, 2 inside the brackets. So we have two answers because this is a quadratic equation. Degree is 2. All right, the last one, you don't have that equal to 0. So what you guys need to do is you move everything to one side. You're going to have to do the opposite. And then you guys need to have an equal to 0. So every time you guys have a variable with the squared positive, I want you guys to keep that positive. So you're not going to do anything to this term. You are going to do the opposite of the other term, this one here, the minus 26a. You guys will move this one to the other side, and you're going to keep this term positive. That's the best thing to do. You always keep the variable squared positive. So I'm going to do the opposite of the minus 26a. I'm going to add 26a on this side, and I'm going to add 26a on the other side. So on the right side, right here, negative 26a plus 26a, that's 0. That's what we need. We got the 0. On the left side, 8a squared plus 26a, they're not like terms. This one has an a squared, this one doesn't have an a squared. So not like terms, you're just going to put them side by side. And notice I always start with the highest exponent. That is your standard form. So 8a squared plus 26a. Okay, now that we have everything on one side equal to 0, I can factor. So I'm going to equal this to 0 here. I'm going to put my parentheses, and I can see I can factor out an a and a 2. 2 goes into 8. 2 goes into 26. So that's the greatest common factor. So let's see. 8 divided by 2, that's going to be 4. And you guys took out an a, so we have an a left. Plus 26 divided by 2, that's going to be 13. And you guys took out the a, So no a's right here. We are ready to solve. So you guys will take the two equations. 2a equal to 0, that's 1, or 4a plus 13 equal to 0, that's the second one. So now you guys just divide by 2 right here, turns into 1, a equals 0, 0 divided by 2 is 0, and over here it's a little bit more work. You guys are going to subtract 13 from both sides, cancels, 4a equals negative 13. You guys are going to divide by 4, turns into 1, so we have a equals negative 13 over 4. Do not turn into a mixed number. You guys cannot reduce negative 13 over 4. So we got our solutions. So my first solution in brackets is negative 13 over 4, comma, 0 is my second solution. So we got the two answers, and negative is always smaller than 0. So that's why that one goes first. It's nice to have in order from lowest to highest. Alright guys, so like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is the third part of this section, and it's just solving quadratic equations, and you guys need to know how to factor. So if you guys like my videos, make sure you guys hit that like button. You guys can also subscribe to my video or my YouTube channel, and make sure you guys practice, and I'll see you guys later.